Greetings. We're in chapter 2 now of Karel von Baalen's book, The Chaos of Cults. This is the 1962 edition, the fourth edition of the book, and he's talking here about the resurgence of astrology in our time. He says, "Many years ago, one of my neighbors one day rebuked my youthful conceit, which had laughed at the zodiac on his wall, with the remark, 'Why, elder, the stars are the messengers of God.' He also drew my horoscope and regaled me with a character description that bade fair to rival the performance of today's psychologists. Some time later, when my literary work was indeed progressing quite nicely, he stopped me in the street with the observation, 'Well, elder, your work ought to be coming along in pretty good shape these days. The conjunction of the planets is all in your favor.' I lost interest in astrology for many years afterward, but now, with the vast increase in its impact upon society, a brief discussion on the subject may well head the growing list of cults dealt with on the following pages. Through the ages, this is his subhead about the history of astrology. Astrology vies with Spiritism for the honor of being the most ancient cult. Perhaps it was first practiced by the Chaldeans in Babylon, where, after being held in high esteem, it was at last despised as mere trickery. From the Medo-Persian Empire it traveled to Greece, under the influence of the efforts of Alexander the Great to amalgamate the East and the West. And here, in Greece, it is said to have been first developed into a science by Ptolemy. Some astrologers are of the opinion that the entire Greek-Roman mythology was based upon astrology. Influenced by the native idolatry of Palestine and Syria, in turn affected by Babylon and Persia, and later by the Greco-Roman civilization, Israel at various times harbored convinced devotees of astrology, although the Old Testament frowned upon it. Judea, it must be remembered, was at one time a Persian and a Roman province. In ancient China, astrology was in vogue prior to 2554 BC, when the astrologers Hai and Ho were deposed for their failure to predict a sun eclipse. Among the Hindus, the classical writers on astrology were Garga, Parashara, and Mahina. They had legions of commentators. In India, astrology always has had and still has a stranglehold upon all of life. Quote, "The astrologer is perhaps the most important functionary in the social and religious life of the people. No marriage can be performed unless the horoscope of the bride and bridegroom harmonize. No social or domestic event of importance, and especially no religious ceremony of any consequence, can be carried on save during what are called auspicious days and moments. Astrology is the right hand of Hinduism, and it has supreme authority in the direction of most of its affairs." That's a quote from John A. Jones, India, Its Life and Thought. In the Middle Ages, astrology was much practiced in Mohammedan lands. Perhaps because astrology and astronomy were originally closely interwoven and even identified, there has been a difference of opinion even among Christians as to its value. Thus we are told that Melanchthon, that is the great reformer, taught astrology at the University of Wittenberg, for which he appealed to Genesis 1:14, that is the narrative of the fourth day of creation, and Jeremiah 10 verse 2. And even Calvin wrote against it in his book Contra Astrology. The great Kepler, who lived from 1571 to 1630, strongly believed in it, as did Dryden, Archbishop Usher, who gave us the King James chronology and the date 4004 for creation. Dr. John Butler and many others were supporters of the doctrine of astrology. He talks about now its present-day popularity. Today, astrologers are increasingly consulted. Paper-bound magazines containing horoscopes and astrological advice, cozily nestled between Western stories and murder mysteries, are to be found on many newsstands. It is confidently asserted that scores of hard-headed businessmen and women would not dare to engage in any important enterprise without first consulting the stars, more accurately the planets. Just as of old, the German matrons warned Ariovistus that he could not win a war with Caesar if he engaged in it before the new moon. Among the most noted advocates, priests, and priestesses of this revived interest in America are listed Evangeline Adams, Myrna Kingsley, whose New York office is lined with photographs of stage people and cafe socialites she has advised, Hollywood favorite astrologer, I think that's Bianca, but it looks like Blanca here, Blanca Holmes, who operates from a home as lush as a movie setting, Keloid of Chicago, president of the American Federation of Astrologers, whose organization has about 500 members, a code of ethics, and nothing but contempt for astrological charlatans. Ex-Follies dancer Nella Webb, who has read horoscopes during tea hour at New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And last but not least, Lester Belt, a Glendale, California barber to whom astrology and dogs have been a dual lifetime hobby. He has prepared individual horoscopes for such famous dogs as Lassie and Fala, and has written a generalized pamphlet of advice called Your Dog's Astrological Horoscope. Its devotees have been currently estimated to number 5 million in the USA, and Charles S. Braden says it is probably the major divination technique in current use in the Western world. The question therefore arises whether astrology is a science and a legitimate pastime, or a religious cult and a superstition. Next time we'll talk about the so-called science that is astrology. I'll put in a link to a book, a very popular book among anti-Trinitarians for some reason, and people who are anti-Christendom, and certainly people that are anti-Catholic, and that is Alexander Hislop's book, The Two Babylons. One of the misconceptions current among anti-Trinitarians is that Hislop somehow disproved the Trinity. That's not true, and I've done a video on the subject to show what he really thought of the Trinity, and here it is on your screen. See you next time for the science that is astrology.